Hello. In this video, I'm going to explain how to make electronic music using a drum machine and a synthesizer. And I'm going to say more about the specific type of drum machine and the synth, how you can connect them and make recommendations for other starter gear later in this video. First, I'll explain the absolute basics of electronic music production as it pertains to creating house and techno as pioneered in Detroit and Chicago in the early 80s. If you've been to the Deershed Festival in Northern England, you may have encountered me with this same piece of equipment teaching kids as young as 4 and 5 how to do exactly what I'm going to do in this video. With almost universal success, all the kids had an amazing time doing this. So I want you to see how it's done too. So the first thing I need to do is push start on the drum machine. This starts both the drum machine and the synth. You may be able to see that they are both in time with each other. And here, as in every drum machine, there's a way that you can program the particular sound you want to happen into the particular step you want it to happen in. On this drum machine, I have 16 steps represented by the 16 steps down here. And I choose sounds by pushing these green sound selector buttons. When that's lit up, I am seeing on the grid places that I can put that sound. And I program them all one by one. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to perform them using these sliders. On other drum machines, there will be a form of muting where you can turn sounds on and off. It's the same thing as using the sliders, but I really like this drum machine for that feature. So I've selected bass drum. I'm seeing places I can put bass drums here, and the volume is up. Let's put one on step 1, 5, 9, and 13. So when I push these buttons, they go red. And whenever the green light hits a red light, you get the sound. And I can actually turn notes off, toggle them, and move them. There's no right and wrong in terms of where you place notes. I think it's an intuitive process, and you can do it as a form of trial and error. You'll come to feel where it feels like the right place. Let's next have an open hi-hat. I'll turn up the volume, I'll push this button, and this column is the open hi-hat. I put it on 3, 7, 11, and 15. Again, no wrong answers here, except this is a very traditional pattern and it works. Let's go for some closed hi-hats. Let's do closed hi-hats on 1, 5, 9, and 14 and 15. And I can trial and error. Let's do this. Oh yeah, let's go to hand clap next and turn that one up. I'll put it on 5 and 13. Let's go over here and let's see what we've got here. Oh yeah, that's the ride cymbal from the 808 drum machine. I like that one. Oh heck. That's the cowbell from the 808 drum machine. Love that sound. Okay, let's turn these ones down and let's turn these ones up. These are the toms. Now, on a lot of drum machines, there is also the option of programming in sounds by tapping them when you feel they want to come in. All drum machines, or most, I'm pretty sure all, will have that feature. On this one, we choose instrument recording, and I look down here on the undersides of the buttons, low tom, mid tom, and high tom. And by tapping these buttons, it just records those moments as I tap them. I'll move back to the TR rec mode, which is the one that we were doing where we see the grid and we can place sounds on the grid. And then the last thing is let's program in some snares. And I'm actually going to use my finger and I'm just going to run it along here in a way that really makes too many snares, doesn't it? But let's turn this down. What I've done now is I've created a busy pattern and I've turned down the volumes, or I have muted all of the sounds. But they've not gone, they're not lost, they're just hiding, waiting to be revealed step by step as we perform in real time. What we're going to do next is get a bassline pattern going, and then we're going to use these faders, or if you had a different drum machine, you could be muting sounds on and off to orchestrate and perform the track as we listen back. So, I'll turn up my synth. Oh, heck. Now this is a Roland TR-8. It's a synthesizer that also has drum sounds built in, but I'm choosing to use the TR-8 due to its size and usability. But what I love about this is inside here is a synthesizer section based on a legendary synth called the TB303. The TB303 launched many a genre, and so we're going to use the 303, or a modern interpretation of it. Now, there are a bunch of dials here which I've put coloured caps on. The two most important ones of all are Cutoff and Resonance. What Cutoff is doing? Cutoff is cutting off the high frequencies. So when I turn it down, the sound is muffled. When I turn it up, the sound is brighter. Now, this works in tandem with the red resonance. And what resonance is it's a peak that's added at the point that the yellow cutoff dial is cutting off the frequencies. And by accentuating that peak, it creates this interesting sharpness to the sound. If I turn it down, the sound becomes very warm and bassy. It doesn't have this kind of squelch anymore, but it does have lots of bass, which sounds cool as well. If I turn the red resonance up, we get a lack of bass, but we get this wonderful kind of acidic squelch. And there are two other controls, env mod and decay. And what env mod is like a little bounce. Every time the note is triggered, there's a bounce. And what the bounce is doing is it's actually moving the cutoff knob for us, like me doing that. Invisibly, the knob doesn't move, but the control behind the scenes is getting bounced by the env mod. And the decay is the shape of that bounce, how short the bounce is or how long the bounce is. And if the bounce is very long, we get sort of longer articulated notes. And if we make it short, we get plucky bounces. And so by changing the configurations of these and moving that yellow dial, I can change the sound in a basic but very satisfying way. It's kept a lot of musicians busy for about 40 years at this point. And I have a delay parameter on here. Delay is like an echo, it's an effect. And then what I'm doing is I'm using these faders to bring sounds in real time as I listen back. And behind the scenes, in my head, what I'm doing is counting bars. A bar is the amount of time it takes for the little light to rush from one end of the 16 steps to the other. And really, I think in my head, I'm counting 8 bars. I think it's 8, isn't it? Because of the style of music we're making, because of the time signature, if you make a change every 8 bars, it feels satisfying and it feels like an audience knows what to expect. The other thing I'm doing is I'm intuitively trying to feel for things that have gone on for a bit too long. Those hi-hats have been playing for a while, and I felt if I take them away, we'll have this more muffled thing. We've just got our toms and our clap and our kick and our cool synth, and I turned down resonance so it sounded muted and muffled. I'm anticipating it. Yeah. And so, as a form of contrast, I thought, well, we've had the resonance down, so let's turn the resonance up and bring the hats back as a form of contrast, because we've had a darker, more muffled section. And so in this way, we can create contrast. And we can create build-ups and breakdowns, where we build a sound up by adding until we've got so much going on. Aha! That was fun, wasn't it? We can use that busy snare drum and just do a bit of this. Woo. And by taking that kick drum away, we create this sense of anticipation. The audience is waiting for something to happen, waiting for you to bring the kick back in. And you can do that and keep everyone very happy. And so what I'm doing is I've created a busy pattern on my drum machine, and I've created a pattern on my synthesizer, and I'm using muting. In this case, I'm using the faders, but I could be pushing mute buttons on a different machine to create the song in real time. And then it's all about just using other tools at your disposal, like effects and other things, in a way that is tasteful and hopefully leads people through a little journey with these machines. The trick is to listen really carefully to what you're doing and ask yourself, what do I want to happen next? Once you've learned the machines and all of the various things they can do, then you'd intuitively start to anticipate, oh yeah, I could do that next. I know what I can do. That comes through practice and just playing and enjoying yourself, recording your practices and then listening back to them is hugely important. It'll help you be objective about what you're doing well and what you're like, actually, now I can listen like an audience member. This is what I would have done. And you'll learn to steer the machines even better. Read their manuals and learn all the things they can do. Find YouTube videos about the machines that you own and learn all their features and link them together. Okay. That's the part where we make music. And here I'll mention how I've got these things connected and some other recommendations about other types of equipment that you might wish to consider if you're making music, or perhaps you're a parent who's thinking about getting some equipment for your kids. Because I spent the whole weekend at Deershed Festival with these two exact things and some other bits of gear, showing kids how to do what we've just done in this video. And I will stress again, all the kids can do this and they have a good time doing it. So I would strongly encourage some form of electronic music production in your life. So to talk about how I have these connected and perhaps to understand a more advanced way of how you might connect gear, well, at the moment, I have the audio outputs of the TR-8, which are full-size jacks. These are 6.35mm jack cables. I have it connected via a cable that has two of those on one end to one that has a mini jack connector, like you might get on a pair of headphones, on the other. Now, the T8 has a mix input, which is a sort of unique-ish thing. A few devices are starting to include them, where the output of the TR-8 is going to be added to the input of the T8, and then the output here you can plug a pair of headphones into. So I'm creating a chain of sound where this goes into here and I hear the output through the headphones here. Now you can get cables that convert from 3.5mm jack to 2 phono cables that would potentially go into an old hi-fi or a DJ mixer. Or, for example, if you had a little portable recorder made by Zoom or someone like that, that had the same type of mini jack input, then you could get a cable that just had this type of connector, the mini jack, on both ends, and connect the output of this to a little Zoom recorder and record both the drum machine and the synth through that one little cable. Now, how do we sync these things? Sync is the name of when I push start on here and it starts both machines in time with each other. Well, that is achieved via MIDI. And so MIDI is an old protocol where with these connectors on the output, these big round ones, I can connect what are called MIDI cables, which have this funny little smiley face in the bottom of them. And if I go from the output of the TR-8 like this, then we follow the red cable and it comes here. Now, just to make life a little bit difficult, a lot of other modern devices have MIDI that is achieved by little mini jack cables. How does that work? Well, you can get little adapter cables which have a 3.5mm jack on one end and a MIDI connector on the other. I think you get one of these with the T8. And if I am mistaken, please forgive me. Roland sell cables which have a MIDI connector on one end and a mini jack cable on the other, and I'm sure those would do the job. But suffice to say, you go from the output of the TR-8 to the input of the T8. And these devices are clever enough that they know to listen for MIDI, so when they hear it through this little cable, they start in time with each other. Now, there is another type of sync that should be mentioned, and that is achieved with just little mini jack cables. And the TR-8 is a little bit older and does not have this type of connector, but you'll find many devices that do. And this works just the same as MIDI in the sense that you go from one device to the other. That is to say, I would go from the out of this device to the in of another device that had sync connectors. And so by pressing start on here, hopefully you would see that they both start at the same time. So to summarize, you have audio cables, and devices like the T8 even have a mix input, so I don't need a mixer. What's a mixer? I think it's really important to mention this because if you have a mixer, and I'll show one on screen, this is a device that literally mixes sound. It takes the sound from multiple devices and it combines it into one sound, so that we no longer use the kind of chaining inputs of these devices. If you get more advanced and you have more devices, I think there's a point where you probably do need to consider getting a mixer. You can get mixers secondhand very affordably for less than £150. I think if you shop around, you should be able to get something like a Mackie 1604 or a Mackie 1202 or sort of equivalent. Mackie's just a great brand for affordable, decent, hardworking mixers that will allow you to have more devices than just 2 or 3, blend them all together, and perhaps add effects using connected guitar pedals and things like that, and really build up your kind of tabletop jamming setup. They also mean that every sound gets put on faders, just like we see on the TR-8. And it becomes very fun to jam all of these elements together. So as an advanced thing, a mixer is something to consider. And finally, in terms of like recommendations for equipment to start with, this is really hard because there are many desktop, tabletop devices, both drum machines, synthesizers, sampling devices that let us record sound that I think are worth investigating. But I'll just mention a few. I think it's really worth mentioning this thing, the Roland T8. And I'm not being paid to say this. I just actually really like this device. This is a very simple synthesizer. It doesn't do much. It does this sound, you know, the 303 sound. But interestingly, it also has its own drums built in. So if you want to hear those quickly, we've got a bass drum and we've got some hi-hats. Ooh, a bit loud that, excuse me. Let me see. And so just as we were doing on the TR-8, in fact, we're doing a similar sort of thing in miniature on the T8. And then I can mute that. And then let's get some claps on the go. Pretty fun, right? And then I hold shift and I can mute that bass drum. And so in miniature, I got a little bit of all of the fun of like Roland of the early 80s in this one device. I can apply effects to this. And I can respect that 8-bar thing and build little tracks, very simple tracks in this device. Now, there's something that I haven't shown you, which is incredibly cool on this. You can randomize and create random patterns. And that's what I did. That pattern I created was completely random. Now, it's worth pointing out you can absolutely record patterns. If I put this in keyboard mode, I can hit record. I can move up and down the octaves. And I can actually record in my own little patterns. I can chain patterns together and make longer arrangements and sort of make proto songs with this thing as well. These are things that I'm not doing in this video, but just to let you know that it can do them. And because it has sync, it has got MIDI, and it has also got the chaining thing. I think it's a really good starting point, but it's obviously very simplistic. Another company, Korg, make a whole range of devices called Volcas, which are sort of so named as a kind of people's synthesizer, synth for the people. And there is a Volca sample device, which I have, this little thing, which has samples, recordings of sounds, all manner of other interesting noises and sounds, which you can sync. Look, we can sync, or we can use MIDI to go from the T8 to this device. And then we could go from output of here into there and add other sounds, other beats, noises we've recorded, noises we've found from other sources, and start making music. A sampler is an incredibly powerful tool because it can sound like anything. You can take the noise of anything and add it to your music. And that multiplies your sound making potential literally infinitely. I would absolutely recommend the TR-8 as a slightly bigger, grander way of playing drums. You can buy a TR-8 for about £250 to sort of £270 at the time of writing, second hand. If you get a TR-8, try and get one with the 7x7 expansion already fitted. That's a software expansion that they released for the TR-8 that adds more sounds. Inside the TR-8, we have the sounds of classic machines, the 808, the 909, the 707, the 606, and the 727 as well. And we can combine them in any number of ways, and we've got all of these faders. I literally think it's one of the best drum machines that Roland ever made. It's brilliant. I think it's so hands-on and fun. There's a lot to be said for the size of this machine. It's a bit less fiddly than this, obviously, but it is more money. If you could just get one thing, I definitely would look at something like the T8. And then in terms of synthesizers, that is to say devices with more sound making potential, I think it's hard not to recommend something like the Arturia MicroFreak. I'll show it on screen. The MicroFreak has a digital oscillator and analog filters, and it has a sequencer. And so we can use its digital oscillators, which are capable of making so many different types of sounds, and we can use its sequencer to create melodies, as we were doing with the T8. And we could chain it through the T8, for example. And actually, I should mention the TR-8 also has a chaining external input too. So I think the MicroFreak offers the broadest sound making potential of really any synthesizer in that sort of price range. I think that's quite arguably so. And I'm sure people in the comments can and will weigh in with other suggestions. I would perhaps maybe mention as an advanced sampler that you may want to consider a device called the Elektron Digitakt. And the Digitakt is a much more advanced version of this, but it is probably also one of the broadest and most useful devices in its kind of price range. Because it's a sampler, it can do so much, but it's a bit more advanced than this. With a few devices on a table, a way of synchronizing them so they all play in time, and a way of chaining them or mixing them with a mixer, you can make music with just a couple of things on a table and have a lot of fun. Music making can offer a lifetime of fun and exploration where you alone or with friends and other musicians can explore the literally infinite possibilities of electronic music. I first started making electronic music with hardware a bit like this when I was 16 years old, and I'm 41 now, and I've never stopped. So what I want to stress is that if you have a slight interest in doing something like this, and you can raise a little bit of money to start with something like this that we see here, then you never know. You might discover that you love it, making music and exploring the infinite possibilities of electronic sound. Thanks.